Hey guys, I want to talk to you today about Tolkien. I realize everybody talks about Tolkien, everybody's got a video on the Lord of the Rings. It's been done to death. I probably don't have anything original to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. So here we go. All right, this is my beautiful red leather bound copy of the Lord of the Rings, imitating the Red Book of Westmarch. And isn't it lovely? This is a book that's really important to me. I've read this book 7 times, read the Lord of the Rings 7 times from start to finish. I try to read it every couple years. It's my favorite book. I love it. I can't get enough of it. And I've read all the supplemental materials. I've read all the Christopher Tolkien stuff, the History of Middle-earth, which is like 12 volumes, the Book of Lost Tales, the Book of Unfinished Stories, the Silmarillion, all of it. Even like things like The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, Farmer Giles of Ham. Huge Tolkien fan. I think he was amazing. And I know a lot of people are huge Tolkien fans. But for the few people, this video is kind of directed at the few people who aren't, and the few people who haven't read the book and maybe haven't seen the movies. And who, I think a lot of those people tend to dismiss The Lord of the Rings. A lot of the people tend to think, oh, it's just another fantasy book. It's like Game of Thrones, or it's like Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time. I actually haven't seen Game of Thrones or read the books, so I really shouldn't rip on it, but I'm going to anyway. The Lord of the Rings is different. It's not just an epic fantasy story. It's got everything in it. It's got everything of human nature in there, every philosophy. The characters are real. They're relatable. I think of them like members of my family. I care so much about these characters. The first time I tried to read Lord of the Rings, I think I was about 10 years old, and I couldn't get through it. I was too young. I got up through like the Bilbo's party. His party goes on forever, and nothing really happens. And I got stuck at that. I couldn't really get through it. I don't think I had read The Hobbit yet. I don't think I knew that story very well, but I think I'd seen the 70s animated version of The Hobbit, which if you haven't seen it, it's really underrated. The songs are cheesy and there's some corny parts of it, but I think it does a good job of capturing the feel of the book. And they made some really great creative choices with it. The guy who plays Gollum in it is really cool, and they did a really interesting design job on Gollum where he looks really different than in the movies, and I think it's a cool creative choice.
My precious, will it taste delicious? Yes.
I like that movie. I think you should watch it. The second time I tried to read it a year later because for some reason I was obsessed with the idea of it. I had to read it even though I was struggling with it. So the second time I made it through the first half of the Fellowship of the Ring, and I got to many meetings when Frodo meets Elrond in Rivendell, and that's about it's not that long of a chapter. I think it's like a 50-page chapter. But when you're 11 years old, 50 pages of people talking and songs and stories and Elvish and poems about Eärendil the Mariner, hard to get through. So I got stuck there and I never finished it. The following year, tried to read it for the third time. I got all the way through. I couldn't put it down. Absolutely fell in love with it. And I remember finishing it for the first time and being so upset that it was over that I immediately flipped the book over and started reading it again. That was my second reading. Took place immediately after the first because I couldn't get enough of it. It's so influential. It's such a defining monument in modern fantasy that I think people tend to dismiss it as, oh yeah, it's just all these fantasy tropes and it's just magic and wizards and dragons and all this stuff. Interestingly, there's not that much magic in The Lord of the Rings. It's weird because one of the main characters is a wizard, and you hear all this talk about a magic ring, but I think Tolkien had a really unique and interesting take on the magical idea. There's a scene when the hobbits are in Lothlorien meeting the elves, and they're talking about magic, and they're in awe of all the elven artifacts and the things that they're giving them, the equipment they're giving them to go on their journey. And they're like, oh, here's this cloak. And they say, is it a magic cloak? Here's some limbus bread to help you. Is it magic bread? And the elves have no idea what they're talking about. The elves don't understand what magic is. They say, well, it's well made. It's really good. Like, this is a great cloak. It'll keep you hidden. It'll keep you warm. This is a great piece of bread. It'll keep you going on your feet for a long time. It'll give you energy. And they say, we don't know what you mean by magic. It's just good, And I think there's something in that. Arthur C. Clarke famously said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And it's a similar idea. Like, magic is the word we give to things that we don't understand. If we don't know how something works, to us it's magic, you know? And I think that's an important point. I've got a cup of coffee here, and to me, coffee is a magic potion. Coffee is the liquid equivalent to Limbus bread. It keeps you on your feet, keeps you awake, gives you energy, warms you up, makes you feel good, gets you through the hard times. I think coffee is amazing. It's one of my favorite drinks. It's magical to me. I marvel at it. And you will say, well, we understand chemically how caffeine affects the nervous system, so it's not magic, it's science. Is there really a difference? You know, does it make it any less magical, the fact that we know how it works? I don't think so. I think that's the key. The key to all my favorite writers, Tolkien being one of them and G.K. Chesterton being another, is their ability to see magic in the world, to understand the magic of the world. And the fact that we have an explanation for something doesn't make it less magical. You can pick up a violin and you can scratch a bow across these strings, and you can elicit these incredible emotions in people. You can make them happy, you can make them sad, you can make people cry with just scraping these strings. That's a magic spell, you know? There's no way that's not a magic spell. But people will say, because we understand how music works and, you know, we understand how harmony works and it's all math and it's all science, that it's not magical. I say that it is. I think that the world is a much more magical place than people give it credit for, and I think Tolkien understood that, and that's one of the things that makes The Lord of the Rings really stand out and endure for me. I think there's this tendency to want to define magic out of existence by saying, oh, well, magic is defined as the impossible, and the impossible can't happen, therefore magic can't happen. But of course, so that's just a definitional problem. That's a tautology. That's if you're going to define it that way, of course. But if you define it as something that induces wonder, something that makes you marvel and just makes you feel something emotionally, of course, there's also the world building that he went into, the fact that he spent decades before he even started writing The Lord of the Rings, coming up with the world that it was set in. You know, there's all this history, there's all this mythology, there's all this poetry that already existed. It just gives it an incredibly rich, deep feeling that most other literature lacks. But more than that, it's just, it's understanding the difference between good and evil, the battle between right and wrong, what makes people tick, what makes people love each other, what makes people sacrifice for each other. And I think that's why it's such a powerful, emotional book that touches so many people and sticks with people for so long. So if you haven't read The Lord of the Rings, if you're one of those few people who hasn't picked it up yet, even if you've seen the movies are pretty good, but even if you've seen the movies, I highly recommend, please pick up Lord of the Rings, give it a read, keep an open mind. I think it remains one of the most amazing books ever written, and I hope you think so too. I'm Logan Albright. Thank you for watching.